On a quiet morning in the Scottish countryside, the peace was a lie. The silence was a cover. At the loss of Kennedy Nature Reserve, all that remained of a life was a charred wreck, a scorched monument to a savage end. The wardens who found it knew instantly this was no accident. The heat had been so intense it had warped the metal beyond recognition. But it was not the car that horrified them. It was what lay twisted beneath it. A body, burned and beaten, a human form so damaged by the flames it was almost impossible to identify. This was not a random act. This was an ambush, a planned, calculated act of murder. What began as a meeting to settle a simple debt had escalated into an act of unimaginable brutality. A young man, lured to a quiet hilltop by someone he trusted, walked straight into a trap that would cost him his life. His name was Steven Donaldson. He was just 27, a loyal friend, a loving son, a man with his whole life ahead of him. But his life was pulled into darkness by a toxic mix of jealousy, betrayal, and a £1,000 debt. This is the story of how an ordinary young man was ambushed, assaulted, and burned alive in a crime that shocked an entire nation. Who would have done this? And why? Steven Donaldson was a beloved son, a cherished friend, and a man who lived a life of simple passions. Born and raised in Arbroath, Steven was a professional in the oil industry, a demanding job that gave him a stable future. To his colleagues, he was focused and hard-working. To his friends and family, he was dependable and fun-loving. He was known for his loyalty and a deep-seated love for his family, including his parents, Bill and Pam Donaldson. Steven's life revolved around a close-knit circle and a passion for motorbikes, which was a central part of his identity and a way to connect with the local biking community. He was the kind of person who seemed to get along with everyone, which is what made his fate all the more perplexing. Then there was Tasmin Glass. Tasmin was also from a small town, Kirriemuir, just miles from Steven's home. She was known as bright and ambitious, excelling in high school and performing in local bands and amateur dramatics. She had a confidence and a charismatic presence that drew people in. But beneath the surface, Tasmin had a complicated personal life. She had been in an on and off relationship with Steven Donaldson, a relationship that, while it had its good moments, was often fraught with conflict. Tasmin's life was also entwined with two other men who would come to dominate this story: Stephen Dickey and Callum Davidson. Dickey, in his early 20s, had a reputation for aggression and a volatile temper. His loyalty to those close to him was a double-edged sword, mixed with a violent streak that made him dangerous. His friend, Callum Davidson, was no different. Described by his own defense counsel as gratuitously violent, Davidson was unpredictable and prone to aggression. These two men were marked by a history of violence. The presence of Dickey and Davidson in Tasmin's life introduced a far more destructive influence. As the relationship between Steven and Tasmin broke down, a new and toxic dynamic began to form, one that would lead directly to a deadly conspiracy. There was also the matter of money. Steven had given Tasmin thousands of pounds, including a car that she had crashed. She still owed him a final £1,000. For Steven, it was a debt to be settled. For Tasmin, it was a problem she wanted to disappear. And for Dickey, Steven was an obstacle to be removed. On Wednesday, June 6, 2018, Tasmin made a move. She contacted Steven to arrange a meeting at the Peter Pan Play Park on Kirriemuir Hill. It seemed like a chance to resolve their issues, but it was a meticulously planned ambush. Steven arrived alone, unarmed, and in his white BMW, trusting that he was meeting only Tasmin. But Dickey and Davidson were already waiting. Evidence later showed that Tasmin had asked Davidson to collect a baseball bat and had dropped the two men off near the park. Steven drove directly into their trap. Just after 11 p.m., the ambush began. Davidson struck first, attacking Steven through the car with a baseball bat, leaving him dazed. Tasmin, who had been the key to the setup, abandoned her car nearby and left the scene. Steven was then forced to drive to the secluded Loss of Kennedy Nature Reserve. There, the violence escalated to a brutal, fatal assault. He was dragged from the car and beaten with the baseball bat. A heavy-bladed weapon, possibly a machete or an axe, was also used. His injuries were catastrophic. 26 separate wounds, a spinal cord severed in 2 places, and countless defensive injuries. This was a savage, coordinated attack. After the assault, the attackers dragged his body under the car and set the vehicle alight, attempting to erase all evidence of their horrific crime. When police arrived at the scene the next morning, they immediately recognized they were dealing with a murder. The press appeal called for witnesses who had seen Steven's white BMW, registration S73VED, but detectives were already building a case from the scene itself. Forensic officers discovered fragments of a broken baseball bat, and DNA testing linked it directly to Callum Davidson. It was the first solid lead. They also noted the presence of another vehicle, a blue car that had been abandoned nearby, later identified as belonging to Tasmin Glass. The net began to close quickly. Witness accounts led police to seize Davidson's bicycle, where forensic testing uncovered Steven Donaldson's blood on the handlebars. Mobile phone data provided a digital trail of deleted messages, call records, and cell site connections, placing Davidson, Dickey, and Glass at both the play park and the nature reserve on the night of the murder. The case was airtight. Tasmin's Apple Watch showed her heart rate dropping into a resting pattern as the murder was carried out. She had gone home and slept soundly while Steven was killed. When approached by police at her job, her bizarre calm was noted by detectives as chilling. Within days, all 3 suspects were in custody: Tasmin Glass, Steven Dickey, and Callum Davidson, charged with murder and a concerted murderous attack. The trial opened at the High Court in Edinburgh in April 2019. It was a highly publicized case that ran for 22 days. The Crown's case was clear. All 3 individuals had acted together, planning and executing the ambush and the savage killing. They presented the overwhelming evidence: the DNA, the mobile phone data, the witness accounts. But the defense teams attempted to shift the blame. Tasmin Glass's counsel claimed she had not intended for serious harm, only for intimidation, and that events had spiraled out of her control. Davidson's lawyer pointed to Dickey, painting him as the violent leader, while Dickey's lawyer responded in kind, arguing that Davidson was the gratuitously violent one. Each tried to save themselves, but the evidence was irrefutable. In May 2019, the jury returned its verdicts. The outcome was decisive. Both Steven Dickey and Callum Davidson were found guilty of murder. Tasmin Glass, however, was convicted of the lesser charge of culpable homicide. The jury believed she had played a key role, but stopped short of a murder conviction. The combined sentences for the 3 were a total of 57 years. Dickey was given a life sentence with a minimum term of 23 years. Davidson was given a life sentence with a minimum term of 24 years. And Tasmin Glass was sentenced to 10 years for culpable homicide. It was a verdict that brought closure for the family in the courtroom, but in many ways, the fight for justice was just beginning. All 3 lodged appeals in the months that followed, attempting to have their sentences reduced. The appeals were firmly rejected. The judges ruled that Tasmin Glass was a prime mover in the killing, a central figure without whom the attack would never have taken place. But while the men's sentences remained firm, the case would take another turn. Due to Scottish sentencing rules, Tasmin Glass would become eligible for parole after serving just half of her sentence, a detail that would ignite a fierce debate about the nature of justice and the rights of victims. For Steven Dickey, the sentences would not be served. Just months after his sentencing, in November 2019, he was found dead in his prison cell at HMP Perth. A fatal accident inquiry revealed that he had taken his own life. For the Donaldson family, the news brought no closure, only another grim footnote to an already devastating case. But it was Tasman Glass's sentence that would continue to stir controversy. She began her 10-year sentence in a young offenders institution and became eligible for day release after just under 5 years. The Donaldson family opposed this at every stage, arguing it was a complete disrespect to Steven's memory. In July 2024, after serving only half her sentence, she was granted parole. The decision provoked outrage, both locally and nationally. Her presence in the community became a source of controversy. Photographs surfaced showing her near a primary school in Dunbar, and the public outcry led to her license being revoked and her return to custody in April 2025. This was followed by another rejected bid for parole in August 2025. Callum Davidson, meanwhile, remains in custody, not eligible for parole until the 2040s. The murder of Steven Donaldson sent shockwaves through the community, and the grief for his family has been lifelong. They have often said their sentence is for life. Each year, an annual memorial motorbike ride is held in Steven's honour, with bikers from across Scotland gathering to pay tribute. For those who ride, it is not only an act of remembrance, but a symbol of solidarity with his family. The tragic story of Steven Donaldson is a reminder of how quickly a life full of promise can be extinguished by a toxic mix of jealousy, betrayal, and violence. But it is also a testament to a community's enduring commitment to keeping his memory alive. If you enjoyed listening to this true crime documentary, make sure to subscribe to our channel. There is always another case to be uncovered.